We have a very exciting video today. We're reviewing chapter 1180, Omen, which is maybe the most anticipated chapter of all time. I mean, there's a couple, right? But we are getting to see what Imu's truly capable of. That's what we're expecting to see. We left off 1179 with Imu on the castle spire, and that's where we start 1180. This is a chapter that I think Oda has to be really, really careful to tread a fine line, because Imu is literally the only character in the story left that we're really like, how strong is he? I mean, Loki, sure, is kind of new, but Imu's the one where we could be all over the place. Really, really strong. Probably, obviously, not that weak, but we don't know how strong he is exactly. So he's on the castle spire. The houses are still singing drums of oppression, is what it keeps being called by people. Kind of like that version of Big Mom's Homies, kind of similar to that, but in more demon form. And people are like, hey, who is that? And then Imu asks a weird question. He asks, who is the king of this country? Which is very odd for a couple reasons, because he already did that via Gunko way back when we kind of started this whole thing with the Holy Knights at Elbaf. So interesting that he asks again, because he knows, and we think he knows, and we know that the answer is Elbaf doesn't have a king. And Dory Broggy remind him, it's like, hey, who are you? We don't actually have a king. And right as that happens, Summers kind of looks a little nervous. He's being held in pieces by Gerd right now and says, great one. Which is kind of interesting to see. Should he have some fear? I think he should, because we know that Imu doesn't actually care about the Gorosei and the Holy Knights. He killed Saturn just like that. And we saw Summers have some fear earlier in Elbaf, right? When Nightmare destroyed the ship originally that was going to take the kids. So we're not really sure what Summers is feeling right now. Probably fear, potentially some hope, because the situation's a little bit lost. And right as he says that, we see Imu cut over to Gerd and just, without doing anything, just kind of take off some of her fingers. And he says, what are you doing, Summers? Like, hey, we are busy. We gotta go. Gerd doesn't even notice for a second that 4 of her fingers are falling off. Everyone sees this. Summers falls to the ground, and then we see Hiruden, Zoro, some of the other Great Warrior Pirates look at that and go, oh, whoa, her fingers, what just happened? So, of course, Zoro being in the area, he pops over to Imu, looks like he is about to do something, and then we see Summers holding his heart. Remember, he has like a metal or iron heart, which is interesting. I've seen a lot of discussions about this, if like this is a thing with the Holy Knights, and there's a lot of ideas that it is. I actually am not convinced yet that that's a Holy Knight's Imu ability. I think that might actually just be Summers. That would explain why he's such an a-hole. Harold, we now have no idea anything about Harold having like an iron heart, so I don't think that's an Imu ability. I think that's a Summers ability, but potentially it could be. We'll get into that a little bit. So currently, Zoro's facing Imu. He walks over there and be like, yo, or ran over there, like, what are you doing? Actually, the word they used was slide. So he slid over to Imu, very specific. And Summers is looking or found his heart. Zoro's like, are you one of those knights? And right as he's doing that, Hiruden's like, whoever he is, he's an enemy. And Hiruden's a guy, I mean, he means well, right? He's the captain of his crew. But as someone who got humbled in the Colosseum, and I've always kind of held an idea that giants and Zoans are, I don't like that they kind of got built up as the end of the story being really strong, because all he has is that he's big, right? He gets whooped, or does he? Because he's about to get his leg cut off or something, and Stanson runs in the way and says, we don't know what's up with that guy, kicks Hiruden out of the way, and loses a leg. Yeah. Yes, so Stanson saves a day, loses the leg, Chopper's freaking out, Broggy's freaking out, Zoro's like, okay, that happened. He uses King of Hell, 3-sword style, to try to attack Imu, and Imu's just looking at him like, huh? And interesting, he's using King of Hell, which he might actually be attacking the literal King of Hell right now, so that is kind of an interesting writing choice there by Oda. And we see Zoro attack him, and what happens? Imu, this is one of the most interesting things we see in the story in general. Imu uses an attack that kind of looks like this, and he says, Omen. And we didn't see him do this to Stanson or Gerd. Maybe that was a different attack, maybe it just wasn't like zoomed in enough in the panel. So he uses this Omen and just like attacks Zoro effortlessly. And then Hiruden's like, I'm back, and tries to attack him again. And this time, he gives him a little, what are these? A combination of Omen, I guess, and attacks Hiruden. And Hiruden just gets like taken out by that. Obviously takes a ton of damage. And this is really interesting. I want to touch on this because, as I said, we really needed to figure out where Imu is in the universe. The One Piece world. I've talked about this a ton in my past videos. It really is extremely important to know where are we at. Where is Imu in comparison? We think he's probably stronger than everyone else, but there are some limitations. Now, he's able to just wipe Hiruden out. I don't think that's a big deal. It's just a giant. I think they're a little bit overdone, in my opinion, on strength levels. But Zoro is a big deal, and he just takes Zoro out like that. Does some weird thing, doesn't even respond to Zoro, and just takes him out like that. I think that's a huge deal. Now, we do think there are some limitations in Imu's power, which we'll see if we see that in the rest of this chapter. So, Hybridon gets taken out, and then we see, like, black flames being brung out. And we see it go over to Summers, who now looks repaired, and he says, whoa, this is it, an omen. Which potentially means that this is the first time he's seen this. Maybe this is something of Imu's that he's known about but never gotten to experience. And this is a way that Summers gets repaired very quickly. And then interestingly, Imu says, quickly, Summers, there is no time to waste. And of course, Summers says, yes, great one. This omen kind of looks like the thing that's on Imu's back here, but without the eyes. So what was interesting about this is he says quickly, which is again implying that Imu is on a clock. Don't forget, in 1179, when we saw Imu arrive into Elbaf, he had blood on his lip. We had that scene where he had like blood coughing out onto the ground. So clearly Imu's not healthy, and what I think is happening here, what a lot of the prevailing theories are, is via maybe a deal with the devil around the Void Century 800, 900 years ago, or maybe via the Api Api no Mi. He's been granted immortality, but it's within a certain realm, which is Marijua or just Castle Pangea specifically. We don't know yet. And if he leaves that area like he did now, he potentially is losing some of his life, or maybe a disease or wound that he had originally received back in the time when he was fighting Joy Boy and Davy Jones. Whenever he's outside of Castle Pangea or Marijua, that wound, disease, or whatever deal he made starts to affect him, which is why he's on a clock here. So this might be just a war of survival. What I think is going to happen here is the Straw Hats are not going to defeat Imu, and it's just going to be about surviving, and Imu's going to eventually return to Marijua. While we're going into theories here, I've heard other ideas about Blackbeard's going to pull up to Elbaf and steal Imu's power last second. I really don't think that's what's going to happen. I don't hope that's what happens. Now, I can see Blackbeard eventually trying to do something like this, but I think it's going to happen at Marijua, and the reason I think that is because it'd be really weird for Imu to just die all of a sudden here. I think we really need to explore him further, and I do think Blackbeard will have to take a shot at Imu at some point, just because of that one panel I've talked about it a bunch, where his father said, I will be back, while he's in the flower room with Imu, which was of course him saying that, Oda saying that, hey, his bloodline will be back. He wasn't just saying that just to kill rocks in God Valley. So, back to the actual chapter here, sorry. Imu just repaired Summers. He says, Summers, quickly, there's no time to waste. And then we scroll down, we see a lot of people panicking, like, whoa, this is crazy. Something's happening in Elbaf, someone else is here, someone more dangerous than the God's Knights. Chief Charles telling everyone to stay alert, which they're probably already pretty alert. I don't think anyone's kind of gotten, well, I guess they did announce that they had subdued the 3 Holy Knights, so that makes sense. But then we get to a big panel. We see Imu's like form when he's flying. And I had mentioned a couple things. Well, I thought he might have been an ancient giant very loosely just because of the horns. We're going to get to that in a second. I didn't really think he was an ancient giant. You could see some parallels with the horns, but I think it's more devil horns than ancient giant horns. But the other interesting thing is he a Lunarian? Now, the wings look very similar to King. We had already seen the hairstyle and kind of like his face kind of seemed potentially like a Lunarian. And then we see the wings, so that kind of adds fuel to the fire. We don't have any other information on it. It just seems like a lot of coincidences that he might actually be the only other Lunarian we know about. And then we kind of pan over, everyone's like, hey, whoa, someone else is here? What? Everyone, get your weapons ready, which, a spear versus Imu. I think we know how that one would go. I know the giants are supposed to be strong, but against the king of the world, which fairness they may not know about, might not work. And then we see Imu spot Gunko, who is of course frozen in like that ice from Ragnar. And what we were told is that the ice can only be unfrozen by Ragnar, which is interesting because the Galila giants, of course, we think are Punk Hazard. Frozen by Ragnar, we think Ragnar is the only thing that can unfreeze it. Then we see Imu aim at it and just like shoot something at it, and we see it kind of like cracks the ice. Now, we don't know what that is intended for. Is Imu trying to hurt Gunko? Is Imu trying to free Gunko? Does it actually fully work? We will see about that, and then Imu just keeps going because clearly he's on a very strict time limit. And then we have another really interesting moment that kind of is all about the title of this chapter. We see Gaban's group, who's like right near the lift of the Sun Realm, and he's like, whoa, what's happening? I've never felt hockey like this before. Not even on God Valley. So in God Valley, if you remember, Imu kind of took over Saturn and possessed him, and that's the biggest hockey Gaban has ever felt. He's like, whoa, this is even worse than that. It doesn't doesn't feel exactly like hockey. And Omen, when you translate it with the kanji, it is actually Maki, which is interesting because it sounds a lot like hockey. So maybe this is like a different power from IMU. And this is a big point of contention in what people are discussing about this chapter. It's not hockey, maybe it's Maki. So it's like the devilish version of hockey, something that only IMU can use. And that's what's actually happening with this Omen business that we keep seeing. And that's why Gabon's like, whoa, I've never felt something like this before. So then we pan over to the Walrus School where Luffy and Loki are at, and they're trying to eat a ton of food. But the problem is, the food's frozen. So Loki's like, I've had enough of this crap. It just brings down some lightning, and then the food gets super burnt. Luffy's like, hey, well, now the food's all burnt. I can't eat that. And Loki's like, hey, it's better than eating frozen food, which, I don't know. Would you rather have frozen food? A lot of people eat frozen pizza, or like overly burnt. I think I'd rather have frozen. I mean, depending on what it is. I don't want to eat like a brick. But if it's really, really burned, it just depends. Then we see Loki eating. He's like, yo, you gotta eat, because we got stuff to do. Then we cut over to Nami, who's now approaching Frankie, Jinbei, and then Usopp and Brook, who are still injured. And everyone's like, whoa, this hockey is crazy. What is this? And then we see Killingham get freed. And how is he getting freed, you ask? Another omen. And he says an omen, thank heavens, which I mentioned earlier. It didn't really seem conclusive if Summers had known about what that was. Maybe he knew what an omen was, but he'd never received it. Like, oh, whoa, here's an omen. Killingham's clearly like, oh, an omen, thank heaven. So he knew about it. Killingham gets freed. We're assuming he's going to get put back together, and I don't see the Iron Heart anywhere. So if you think I'm missing something on that, let me know. But I really think that's just a Summers thing. So Sanji, who was kind of guarding Killingham, sees the omen, sees him gets freed, and says, hey, who are you? As he's looking towards Imu. Jinbei and Frankie are also seeing him, and it's like, hey, Sanji, be careful, that person's dangerous. Have Sanji, Luffy, or Zoro ever backed down from a fight? No, so they're not going to start there. Sanji's like, hey, who said you could free that guy? And he goes to attack Imu. We don't know what it is. It's probably Diable Jambe. And clearly it does not work. Sanji just gets tossed aside, and this is another important power scaling moment that Oda has to be careful. Zoro and Sanji have not taken a lot of L's in the New World. Up until Gear 5th, a lot of people were thinking, is like Zoro comparable to Luffy? Now we see that they just get absolutely wiped. So that sets the stage for Imu's strength, because it's very, very tricky to balance that rightly. And then we get kind of towards the last few panels of the story, and Jinbei's like, whoa, what's with the black flames? And then we see Loki's big-ass foot, and this will help answer the question here in this panel about if he's an ancient giant, which no one has been asking but me. And Loki says, hey, what business do you have on Elbaf? Maybe not in that, like, inquisitive sense, more of like an angry sense. And Imu finally starts to talk. We haven't really seen him say anything except to Summers and Killingham. He says, 14 years ago, Harold was killed here, which, of course, we know, and it was Loki who did that. He says, I have come to find the one responsible. He was my servant. Loki did not take that well, as you can imagine. His father, who loved him, Loki very angrily in all capitals, like hell he was. Harold was my father, and more than he was the king of Elbaf. And then we get a panel of Loki standing up, super huge, like, I'm the one you're looking for. And we see a size comparison, so clearly Imu has not an ancient giant, just the horns kind of look similar. It's like a devil horn thing. And then Imu says, I see. If thou had not been here, many tribulations could have been avoided. And then Loki's like, where would I have been? Where would I have been but Elbaf, which, of course, because he's from there, so what else would I be doing? And Loki says, remember that next time, you dumbass. And that's how the chapter ends. So a couple interesting tidbits here, right? Harold was killed 14 years ago. Loki, I think, was on sea for like 8 years until he got captured by Shanks, and he's been chained up ever since. It's been a bit since that happened, but remember, when Harold died, Imu was actually kind of shook. He's like, whoa, what kind of monster could be on Elbaf? And that's what he was looking for. And interesting that, obviously, it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that whatever that is probably still here. So we don't actually get to see Luffy fight in this chapter. He's still eating. I assume that will potentially be the next chapter. Here's what I think is going to happen. This is just my personal headcanon. If you have any ideas, please let me know. I'm very curious. What I think is going to happen is, I think it's just going to be like a war of attrition again, kind of like Egghead. But this time, the Straw Hats aren't leaving. I think time is going to run out, and Imu's going to have to return to Marijua, and he's going to take the Holy Knights with him, so the kids aren't going to get captured or anything. And then I think we're going to have a training arc. Now, I say a training arc, what I think is going to happen is Gabon is going to do some training for the likes of Luffy, Sanji, and Zoro. Now, the problem with that idea is that how much stronger is Gabon if he's stronger? Maybe just from, like, some sort of helping him with hockey, some sort of knowledge, something like that. But I think we're going to have the final fight in Marijois. I think it makes just a ton of more sense because I think we have a couple things we still need to do. We still need to go to Hachinosu. It'd be so weird, right, to just fight IMU now, win. It's like, okay, what else do we do? Why would we ever go to Marijois White? We have to deal with the Gorosei. It'd be weird to deal with IMU first and then deal with the Gorosei, right? So that's what I think is going to happen. Some other ideas is that Blackbeard's going to come and attack IMU. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Blackbeard is going to attack IMU, but I'm not sure about when it's going to happen. Because remember, there's a few events that need to happen, okay? Luffy toppling IMU doesn't actually have to happen, right? The way this could go down is IMU could just run out of time, take the Holy Knights with him, they leave, and then Luffy's not going to be like, all right, guys, I'm going to Marijois, I'm going to take that guy down. That's never been a thing he's been about, right? He's always said, I'm not a hero, that's not who I am. I think what happens is IMU leaves, potentially a training arc, and then at some point we're going to Hachinosu, right? Like, when does Luffy find out about Garp? Then we're going to Hachinosu, and then do we fight Blackbeard then? You would think we'd have to, right? But wouldn't you think we'd fight Blackbeard, like, right where we're going for the One Piece? But then, wouldn't you think Blackbeard has to fight IMU at some point as well? So it's just this weird triangle that there's all these events that don't make a ton of sense. We have Hachinosu, that has to happen. We have the One Piece, you think we'd fight there. And then Marijois, you think at some point someone has to take down IMU. It would make sense that it'd be Luffy, just from a antagonist, probably the main antagonist, the main protagonist. But then again, they don't like each other, but Luffy's goal isn't to defeat the world government, it's to find the One Piece. So a lot of moving parts. Very interested to see what happens in the next chapter, because clearly we are going into IMU versus Loki and Luffy very soon. Probably the next chapter, unless Oda hits us with something different. I'm not sure. I think we covered a lot of the main topics here. I'm really, really excited for 1181. No break next week. 1181 will be out next week. If you guys think I missed anything or you have any interesting thoughts, let me know. And I think that's it for this one. If you leave a sub and like, it'll help the channel a lot. And I will see you for the next video. Thanks.